Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 17th episode of A QISSAA with Ishika, quintessential and inspiring stories of South Asian artists, funded by the California Arts Council Individual Artist Fellow Grant. My name is Ishika Muchal, and I am coming to you from the ancestral and unceded lands of the Gabrielino Tongva people, also known as Los Angeles, California. I am so excited to introduce to you my guest today, Vinita Sud Belani. She is an actor, director, producer, and the founding artistic director of Enacte Arts, a theater company co-located in Houston and the Silicon Valley. Enacte Arts centers South Asian stories in a global context, focusing on inclusive representation and talent development. Vinita's recent directing credits include productions such as Go to Your Room, Mother, Chaos Theory, The Conference of the Birds, Soundwaves, The Passion of Noor Inayat Khan, Queen, and The Case of the Vanishing Firefish, which she co-wrote. She is trained in street theater under director and playwright Badal Sircar. Beyond the arts, Vinita has over 20 years of CXO level experience in the corporate world, in technology development and management of technology, both in large multinational corporations and Silicon Valley startups. She has lived and worked in 9 countries across 4 continents, speaks 7 languages fluently, and has served on several nonprofit boards dealing with education access, domestic violence, and sex trafficking. I am so honored to welcome Vinita Sud Belani. Thank you so much for joining me today on A QISSAA with Ishika.
Ishika, you know that I like to talk to you on camera or off, and A QISSAA with Ishika is such a delightful way to chart, I guess, South Asian artists' journey. So kudos for starting this, and thank you for inviting me, and it's such a joy to be here.
Thank you for the precedent that you have set and the platform that you have created for so many South Asian artists. And I know that you didn't start in the arts, so actually that was my first question for you. Since the early part of your career was so heavily based in the corporate tech world, what drew you to the arts and made you fully transition into this field?
Actually, I did start in the arts. I got a role in my kindergarten play when I was 7 years old. I played Mother Goose in the Mother Goose nursery rhyme stories, and I felt the stage beneath my feet. And Mother Goose was a role in which I got to boss people around, and I thought, oh, this is my calling. And theater has been a part of my life since that moment, especially acting. And then at the age of 19, I started to direct. But it was always a passion. And I had other passions. Actually, physics was my big passion, and mathematics. And so I went to engineering school. I became an engineer and jumped into the world of computer science, which back in the 80s was a world it was a flower that was just unfurling. There was a lot of possibilities. And so I always thought of myself as an engineer with a passion for the arts.
Right.
And then, of course, there was one momentous moment, and I totally pivoted. In all the time that I was working in technology, I was living in different countries. I have 3 children between trying to keep a job and raising kids and moving countries and, creating a new identity every time. Theater was not possible because theater takes a lot of time. And I think there was this big hole in my life because theater and engineering balanced me out as a human being, and I was feeling imbalanced. And I was living in Paris, and I happened to get invited to dinner at a friend's house, and she said, I have a friend who knows a lot about India who really would love to meet you and talk to you about India. And I'm like, that sounds interesting. And so we show up at this friend's house, and sitting in front of me, having dinner with me, was the great and glorious Mr. Jean-Claude Carrière, who, along with Peter Brook, who unfortunately passed away yesterday, he had written the Mahabharata, and then they had done. It was a watershed moment in theatrical history. It was the first time anybody had dared to take a deeply South Asian epic and tell it in a way that it was completely comprehensible to Western audiences.
Right.
I was sitting there having dinner with him. We were having long chats about India, about Mahabharat, how he's connected to the story. And I said, well, when you did the Mahabharat, I was in my 20s, and now I have kids who are, in their teens and about to get into their 20s. And we should just do the Mahabharat all over again.
Yeah.
And he looked at me with a twinkle in his eye and he says, do you have a theater company? If you do, we can do the Mahabharat. And I said, no, but I can start one. And he said, okay, you start a theater company, we'll do the Mahabharat. And of course, I went home that night and I couldn't believe that I had had dinner with this, incredible. I mean, this is a man with 11 Palme d'Ors and 7 Oscars. And, he has brought to life everybody from Helen Mirren to Marion Cotillard. And I was just, I couldn't sleep that night. And the next morning, I called my friend and I said, give me Jean-Claude's number. And I called him and I said, were you serious? And he says, I never joke, again, with a twinkle in his voice. And so we had lunch and I quit my tech job and I started a theater company. And Enact, for the first 2 years of its existence, did nothing but tour around America with the Mahabharat storytelling piece, a 90-minute storytelling piece in which Jean-Claude himself played Vyasa, who tells the story of the Mahabharat.
Mm-hmm.
He would act out the opening scene with a little boy, and Vyasa says, come here, boy, I will tell you the story of your ancestors. And then they invite Ganesha, and we would have a Bharatnatyam dancer come on stage and be Ganesha, who would break off his task and start writing the Mahabharat. And everywhere we went, every show that we did, we had to turn people away. We had to add more seats in the auditoriums. We played in schools and colleges, in museums. Our first show was in the foyer of a museum. We started out with 100 seats and eventually had to put 285 to accommodate the whole rush. So for 2 years, that was my life, traveling around the country with Jean-Claude in planes, cars, trains, telling the story of the Mahabharat to people in America. And that's how Enact got started.
That's amazing. And what was the inspiration behind calling it Enact?
So enact is a French phrase, en acte, which means in action. And of course, it translates almost exactly to enacting, which is, just
right.
Bringing to life, in a story, a concept. So I felt it was very apt because for a very long time, I was a successful technocrat, but I didn't feel like I was in action. So also for me.
Right. Absolutely. And so you said that you started in acting and directing, and then you created this this production company. So acting and directing themselves are not very common fields for South Asians to go into, but especially arts administration. So what draws you towards that area of the artistic field, especially?
So, like I said, Enact got started as a platform for this one story.
Right.
But when I founded Enact, and then we started looking for what else we should do, 10 years ago, almost exactly to the day, we are 10 years since the company was incorporated.
Wow.
I was looking around, and in America, because shortly after we had the conversation with Jean-Claude, I was transferred from Paris to Houston, and but we had kept our home in Silicon Valley because I had lived there earlier before going back to Paris. And so I co-located the company in Houston and in Silicon Valley. But when I started to look around, there were very, very few South Asian theater companies. The representation of South Asians was minimal. And our stories were, like the Mahabharat got told because it was Jean-Claude and Peter Brook. But our stories were not being told. And so there was this vacuum, and I moved in to fill the vacuum. So I had started companies before. I started 2 tech companies, and I'd worked in technology startups before. So the idea of starting a company was not intimidating. in tech startups, you start the company because you have a product and you think it's going to have, but you learn as you work on, how to form the company, how to. So that's how it was with Enact. I knew nothing about the theatrical landscape in America, other than the fact that there were these huge gaps in representation.
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing about, HR and payroll and on all the things that other people did for us. I didn't know anything about fundraising. I'd never hosted a gala to raise money before.
Yeah.
Uh, but I like the challenge. I like the challenge of waking up every morning and learning something new and hitting my head against a problem. And arts administration, you can define arts administration in my mind with one sentence. You wake up in the morning and you have maybe about 432 challenges that you have to address. And by the time you go to sleep at night, you've addressed maybe 128 of them. And so
Yeah.
it is not an easy task. It is not an easy task. But you know how Gandhi and MLK and everybody said, you just have to be the change you want to see in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in this part of the world, I wanted to see a strong voice that comes from the land that I came from. And
Absolutely.
we are one of the most ancient civilizations in the world, and we have a treasure trove of stories that is so large. It is larger than the Greek, the Roman, the Anglo-Saxon, the
Mm-hmm.
European stories all put together. Uh, and why are we not being heard?
Right.
And so that's the driver.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. We have what, 1 billion people. Of course, we're going to have a lot of stories to tell. Um, and
Yeah, 1 billion people with 6,000 years of
mm,
traceable culture, right? There was a whole lot before that.
of
Uh,
course.
so it's a little different from a 200-year-old culture that is still evolving,
Hmm.
and then there's a lot to talk about, a lot to tell. A lot of learning has happened over the millennia,
Hmm.
which I feel, like the Mahabharata itself, it is 10 times as long as the Iliad and the Odyssey put together. And the opening sentence says, what you will find here, you will find elsewhere. But sorry, I'm saying that wrong. um, yeah, what you will find, you would find elsewhere, but what you cannot find here, you will find nowhere else. So, in essence, it is the poem of all humanity, and
Hmm.
everything about humanity has been incorporated in that poem if one were to spend time reading those 10,000 stanzas.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, I've grown up listening to the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and all these classic stories that um, I feel like people just, I guess, underestimate the significance that Indian culture brings with it. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate how you founded Enact Arts to kind of fill the vacuum that was present in regards to representation. Um, so, what exactly is your role as founding artistic director? Like, what does a day in the life look like for you?
Oh gosh. Well, there's some fun things. There is the creative aspect of it. I get to decide what plays we're going to do. I get to decide,
Right.
who the creative team is that we bring together to do the play, and then I get to pick the director.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'm so in love with the play that I just cannot hand it over to another director, in which case I direct it myself.
Right.
Uh, Sometimes I read this and I say, oh my gosh, I know the perfect director for this play. And I try to balance the season between, contemporary work, because almost everything that we do at Enact is new play development.
Mhm.
Other than Conference of the Birds, which was written by Jean-Claude, we have not done any work that has been produced more than once. And very often it is produced for the first time at Enact.
Wow.
So this is, we are, as a talent incubator, we are committed to not just growing representation in acting and in creative talent, but also in playwriting. And we have a whole new play development program at Enact now, which is formalized. So finding playwrights whose voice resonates with the times, with our audiences, that is a fun part of being in the creative process. But there is a lot of, like I said, those 430, did I say 32 little talent that you do every day. Where are we going to rehearse? What food are we going to eat? Has someone swept the floor? Hope there are no nails around.
Right.
So and so's, grandmother needs him, and so this actor is not going to show up for rehearsal today. And um, just the mechanics of doing things, because there are so many moving parts. Um, the the fundamental thing about theater is that it is a collaborative process. It is real-time human to human collaboration. And
Right.
that is fraught with a lot of challenges, because you really have to leave your ego at the door with your shoes when you walk into the space, and you have to give of yourself unstintingly to whatever project you're working on in theater, and to bring people to the point where they are trusting of each person enough to do that. I think that's my fundamental role as an artistic director, is to create a team that is so solid that if somebody falls off a chair, somebody is already there to catch them, literally and metaphorically.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said about Enact being a talent incubator, and just touching on the importance of incubating and developing writers along with performing artists is so important, I believe, in this time, because of course that representation is slowly increasing in front of the screen, but until we are the ones telling our stories, it's not going to be as authentic and as real and as connected as another person telling our story. So I
Exactly.
really appreciate that about Enact and
I
your
that bit that you said about authenticity really resonates with me, because now a lot of the work that we do at Enact is, we are a highly collaborative theater company. There are very few things that we do that are not in collaboration with somebody else. But one of the things that we are now doing is we are working with other theater companies, either to provide the appropriate talent or the appropriate language or the appropriate dramaturgy or the appropriate costumes or movement exercise to bring that level of authenticity when
right.
they do a piece that has a South Asian element in it, or maybe is even wholly South Asian. I'm just working with the San Jose Opera to, they're setting Mariage de Figaro in colonial India.
Oh wow.
So and so very naturally they reached out to us, and I think that is the image of Enact that I do want to propagate, that we're the go-to people if you want cultural authenticity.
Right.
We're there to provide all of that. So
Yeah, and you were also talking about how you get to pick the material for the season and select your collaborators. So, what draws you specifically to material? Like, what makes you look at a play and go, I want to produce this?
for a few years, I was telling stories of very powerful women from South Asian history. And these are women who, if they were men, would have been incredibly famous, but because they weren't, they aren't.
Of
Like
course.
the Empress Noor Jahan, she was the only female in the entire Mughal dynasty to ever rule in her own name. Like
Wow.
Noor Inayat Khan, who was this, Muslim Indian living in Paris when World War II broke out, and she became a radio spy for the Allied command. And she did an incredible job. She was eventually shot and killed by the Gestapo, in one of the concentration camps. But posthumously, Churchill awarded her the George Cross, which is the highest honor of bravery. And he
Wow.
said that she single-handedly reduced the course of the war by 3 months. 3 months in a war is a very long time. Can you
Yeah.
imagine how many lives she saved?
Yeah.
And nobody knows about her. So I was looking for those stories. I'm looking for writers who have a really powerful voice in talking about contemporary issues. Like, for example, we did A Nice Indian Boy with Madhuri Shekhar, and we did A Queen with Madhuri Shekhar. Madhuri Shekhar is one of my most favorite contemporary playwrights in America today.
Me too.
She is talking about issues that we, as South Asian origin people living in America, the issues that we confront on a daily basis.
Mhm.
You're highly educated, you work in the tech sector, you have a child who is gay, you want them to have a happy, fulfilling life, but the idea of a gay child is somewhat disturbing to you. How do you deal with that? You know, this play Queen is about why bee populations across Central Valley are dying because of pesticides, certain chemicals in Monsanto pesticides that are really bad for the environment. As we were doing the play, and we kept doing reruns of the play, first, Obama instituted bans on these pesticides, then France did, then all of the European Union did, then the political climate changed. Trump rolled back all of Obama's bans. Now those bans are being reinstated. We were talking living history and
Mhm.
environment, the environment, climate change. These are things. I guess women and the environment are my triggers, but the play has to have soul.
Right.
If if I read it and the soul doesn't strike me sort of immobile for a few moments after I've read it, then I'm not interested in doing it.
Yeah. That is a good qualification. Yeah. So
We say that if someone comes to see this play and it doesn't trigger a breakfast table conversation about that subject tomorrow on your breakfast table,
mhm,
then it's not a play worth doing. So
mm,
there's a little activism involved
of
because we
course.
have to use our voices judiciously.
Yeah. Something that leaves an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're finding all these stories to tell, but if you could choose one story yourself to tell and share with the world, what would that be?
Um,
If there is one you're particularly drawn to.
well, I'm definitely drawn to the Mahabharata, and I'm going to do the whole 9 hours of it one day. Once, if as soon as I can raise enough funding to
Mhm.
make that happen. But I think that, and I'm going to sound terrible saying this, but I'm going to say it nonetheless. Is I think would be the story uh, of me, because I grew up in a very conventional, conservative family in a conservative era, and being an engineer for women was not really an option at a time when I became an
Mhm.
engineer. Traveling the world as I did was not. Nothing I did fit into the box of who I should have been.
Mm.
Uh, and I think it's just a way of saying you can reinvent yourself as many times as you want, as long as you drop the notion that I have to live in a box that
Mm.
somebody else defined for me.
Yeah.
That's the story I would want to tell, is let go of the boxes.
That's beautiful. And why would you ever feel bad about telling your story, using your voice to share your voice? I mean, that's
No, I
incredibly
would. I,
powerful.
I don't think I'd feel bad. It's just, there are other far more compelling stories to tell. But my story is personal to me, right? And so I should be
Absolutely.
one to tell it. Yeah.
Yeah. If not you telling your story, who else would?
Maybe you, Ishika, now in this
I would be
moment.
honored to. Yeah. Um, I want to ask you about some of the early struggles that you had in your arts leadership roles. And I'm just really curious, were you ever pressured, or did you ever feel pressured to fit in um, at the top, especially as a woman of color running an arts organization?
um, it hasn't been easy. At first, nobody took me seriously.
Hmm.
It was like, oh, she likes to do theater, so she likes to act, so she started a theater company. Somebody even accused me of starting a nonprofit so I could get a tax break. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't know how that would work, but yeah, whatever. um, it was, uh, I had to prove myself day after day, every day. There were many naysayers, some within the community that I come from, and then there was there wasn't in the initial stages a whole lot of acceptance from uh, what as as immigrant minorities we tend to think of as mainstream American theater,
Right.
Um, but the only way I know how to to put my money where my mouth is and to prove my worth is to just do the job.
Right.
As we started to do things, you know, um, we have built up over 10 years a vast degree of credibility, but it has been brick by brick. You know, now
Yeah.
we get playwrights sending their work to us and saying, would you do this play? I remember there was one play, and I won't name the play or the playwright, that we wanted to do, and we reached out, and this South Asian playwright said to me, "Oh, you're a small mom and pop store. I don't want this play to be done anywhere except Ashland, Oregon." And I
Ooh.
was, fine, okay. That play never did get done. So, um, the message is, if you like uh, if you like the vision, learn to trust.
Mm.
Don't be quick to either dis or dismiss people who are trying, because a career in the arts, no matter whether you're an administrator, director, actor, is excruciatingly difficult
Yeah.
and thankless. You think it's very, um, there's a lot of glory and a lot of, glitz attached to when things actually come together on stage. But it's a grueling task. It's really, what you see is the sunrise at the top of the mountain, but you've had to climb the whole mountain. And I think my role now, now that Enacte Arts is, we have 37 collaborators in our last 10 years, everybody from the Arts Emerson to many universities to, East West players. I mean, lots of um, very established theater companies that collaborate with us on a regular basis, including
Mhm.
SF6 and just a whole bunch of collaborators. So now I think my role is to inspire other people to make that journey.
Mhm.
Say it can be done. You just have to take that first step and find the people who will walk with you in that journey.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And not
it,
everybody will. And
right.
then there'll be lots of people who just put a roadblock and say, you can't, but you can.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely working. You are inspiring many people, myself included. And speaking of collaborators, you mentioned East West Players, where that collaboration was how I had the honor of meeting you through the Italiana. And that was a fully virtual production for those who are watching who might not be aware of it. And I just want to ask you how you pivoted as Enact Arts during the pandemic, and what a virtual shift meant for you, and how you started that process.
It was a shock. It was a shock to every arts organization. I think every, corporate organization just was struck to life to everybody. But I think the thing that helped us tremendously is that in our DNA has always been the nature of collaboration.
Mhm.
And when physical collaborations shut down, um, very quickly we pivoted to reaching out to people that, in the theater world that I knew, who were in other parts of the country, in other countries, in other time zones, and say, you know, we now have an opportunity to do something we would never otherwise do, which
Right.
is collaborate to make theater in a digital space where the whole world is just one global village. There are no political, geopolitical, natural, unnatural boundaries. There are just no boundaries. The only thing that can be a boundary is how good is your internet connection.
Mm.
And what an incredible opportunity that is. And so I reached out to a friend of mine, Denzel Smith, who was in Bombay, and his theater company, Stage Smith Productions, and our theater company. We collaborated on a play that we had been thinking of doing but hadn't been doing, called Letters to a Daughter from Prison, which is all the correspondence between Jawaharlal Nehru and his daughter Indira,
Mm.
all the times that he was in jail, because he had decided he was going to be the best father ever, and being in jail was not going to stop him from being the best father ever. And
Mm-hmm.
he's an extremely well read, erudite statesman with this really, really deep commitment to getting freedom for India. And so through those letters, you see what the freedom movement, how it evolved and what it meant to the people involved in that freedom movement. And today India is the world's largest democracy, but we get to look into the really intimate thoughts of the people who worked so hard to find the independence that created that democracy.
Mm-hmm.
It was an incredible production. Denzel was in Bombay, I was in California, our director was in London. None of us knew how to use Zoom, uh, but we somehow muddled through. We found this incredible dramaturg in Rashina, who is, um, she's a chemical engineer who designs chips, and just gave up that chip design process and jumped into this rabbit hole of what was Indira and Jawaharlal Nehru's relationship like, and it was just mind blowing. And that show, it was, I think, one of the very, very first Zoom plays. So
Mm.
we were in right from the beginning. And Rashina is technologically very savvy. So when she did the creative dramaturgy, she made it look, we had to be our own tech people. We had to do our own lighting. We had to adjust our own camera.
Right.
We had to we were reading letters, and so it had to look like we weren't reading them, but we were reading them. I mean, there was a whole bunch of challenges in that play. Then, of course, after that, things got far more sophisticated. The Zoom platform got sophisticated, and other platforms came into existence and got highlighted. And then we collaborated with Rage Productions, we collaborated with East West Players, we collaborated with Hypocrite, we collaborated with a whole bunch of theater companies, um, in many different geographies that we have now created this little global village of collaborators,
Yeah.
which, is, we have made friends that will, lifelong friends. And
Mhm.
at the drop of a hat, we can. So when we talk about the production that I'm just beginning to mount, we'll see how all of that came together. So it was fun. But
Mhm.
we started a new play festival where we got playwrights to send plays. 42 plays came in. We developed 10 plays. We produced 6 plays, and they were all about normal everyday life set against the backdrop of COVID.
Mm.
Those 6 plays have now become iconic in documenting life during COVID times.
Right.
And so, we plan to publish the 6 plays as the COVID plays, which
Mhm.
all different aspects of life in COVID. Just, trying to do a birthday party with dad who's in another city, or
Right.
how to cremate your dead mother because the crematoriums were so backed up, or,
Mhm.
love, loss, longing, belonging in times of COVID.
Mhm.
Of course, the beautiful Sitayana project, and then we did another project with the same collaborators with Danny Putty's
Mhm. Running.
running. Yeah, um, the possibilities, it just opened
Mhm.
up, and I don't know if it's because I come from a technology background, but we really embraced it wholeheartedly, and we
Mhm.
were prolific beyond belief.
Yeah. And I think the shift, although of course the pandemic has had so many negative effects as well, but the accessibility increase because of our virtual arts has has really made a difference in who all gets to see the arts and
Yes,
who all gets to be a part of that process.
yes, it really, yeah. Since
Yeah.
your show is called A QISSAA with Ishika, I will tell you a story about a QISSAA.
Yes, please.
I have a very dear friend, an incredible actor and storyteller, Danish Hussain, who does a form of Urdu storytelling, fantastical Urdu storytelling called Kissebazi. And
Mm.
he has come and presented Kissebazi at Enact a few times. And he happened to be caught in COVID. He had come to visit his sister and then he couldn't go back to India. And he was sitting around, frustrated. And I said, well, let's do a Zoom kissebazi. And he said, Vinita, no, oh my body, this ain't happening. Kissebazi is all about, this one-on-one connection.
Right.
And so I said, fine. I called him up 3 weeks later and said, Danish, let's do kissebazi. No, Vinita. I. Danish, again, 3 weeks later. So 3 months of persuasion. And then he did a Zoom version of it, and he said, only for you and for no one else will I ever show it, my kissebazi on a digital media.
Uh-huh.
But that kissebazi, he had the camera so close to his face and you could see every nuance and expression and breath. And we had audience members from as far as Melbourne, Australia, and from Dubai, and, of course, from Pakistan, and all of these places. And we had a post-show talk back. It was a 1 hour kissebazi storytelling, and we had a post-show talk back that lasted more than 90 minutes.
Wow.
People were just so excited, to hear these amazing stories and this amazing storyteller, but then also to get a peek into his life and how his journey as a storyteller brought him to this level of being this mesmerizing,
Mhm.
performer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That's beautiful. And I think those conversations are so necessary to happen, like just sharing the story for the sake of sharing the story.
yeah.
And I
Transcend mediums and stay true,
Mhm.
And so whatever medium works, you just have to embrace it, I think. And
Yeah.
it was not easy. It was very scary.
Mhm.
Revenues were, a fraction of what they should have been, but then, grants
Right.
picked up. Um, Everybody wanted to do their bit to support artists, and
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and as we are seeing this slow but still slowly emerging cultural change and shift in the arts and just like in society in general, I wanted to ask you if you could create any change in our industry, what would it be, and what do you think are the steps to accomplish that?
Um, I think the big, the big that battle that we have to fight is the perception that theater companies that tell stories uh, of a certain geographic region or culture, like a South Asian theater or a Japanese theater
Mhm.
or a Native American theater, that we are not mainstream,
Mm.
because the perception is, I find this as an as an arts administrator. I am also an incubator of art
Right.
administration talent, and people come to Enact raw, and then we train them to be proper administrators, and then they get incredible jobs elsewhere. But I often find that the mindset is that I'm working for a niche theater company, and my
Mm.
goal is I will have arrived once I start working for a mainstream theater company.
Right.
But we are just as mainstream as any other theater company. And so
Exactly.
to to get over that mindset is, I think, people like Mindy Kaling in popular culture are doing a lot to overcome that mindset. And as the Mindy Kalings of the world start collaborating a lot more with the Reese Witherspoons of the world, this will happen. But I think
Right.
it needs to happen at a much more accelerated pace,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can look at it, you can watch a Korean drama on Netflix and watch it as entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But and that flip has just happened over COVID.
Right.
And so we need that same flip to happen for theater.
Absolutely. And it's only niche because we act like it's niche. Like
Yes.
it's not actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
I try not to, but but that's the psyche of the immigrant, right? Except we are just as much a part of the fabric of society as anybody else, and
Mhm.
everybody at some point has been an immigrant. And I'm just talking about the American context. In the global context, of course, there are parts of the world where the acceptance levels and that perception is not there anymore. For example, I see in British theater there just isn't that much differentiation.
Mhm.
And Peter Brook had a lot to do with it. God bless his soul. He passed away just yesterday, but he was instrumental in creating, I don't know, 6 decades of encouraging people to think completely outside the box. So we need a lot more Peter Brooks in the world.
Yeah, and if we are as globalized as we are now, it only makes sense for our art to be globalized too.
Yeah, and just on the subject of Peter Brook, he was the child of Latvian immigrants and changed his name from Reich to Brook to fit in. But
Mm.
now he's considered this icon of British culture. But he's an immigrant Brit,
Right.
except that differentiation is not being made.
Mm.
And that's the level that we need to come to, where there is no differentiation. Every story is important.
Yeah. So what is your favorite part about your work at Enact Arts?
I cannot lie. My favorite part about my work at Enacte is I love everything about Enacte. I work 16 hours a day, which I didn't very often do for my job in my corporate world. Is working with children.
Mm.
Uh, we started very early on. We realized that we weren't able to cast plays with strong enough actors because they just weren't enough available. It was this chicken and egg where there wasn't enough opportunity, and so
Right.
there weren't enough actors growing, and creative lighting designers. There are very, very few South Asian lighting designers that I know.
Mhm.
So we needed to go back and create a formalized school, which we now call the Enacte School of Drama,
Mhm.
which has a K through 12 program. It has the studio, which is the adult education program, and then it has the conservatory, which is a year-long program in which advanced students of theater, anywhere between the age of 7 and 107, can just come and do theater together.
Oh, wow.
So that process of taking children and just they come with the passion for theater, but to ignite it and to see it blossom, and then to put them in plays, professional theater with grown-up actors, and see them hold their own.
Mhm.
For me, that is in almost all the plays that we do, especially the large plays with big casts. I have anywhere from 3 to 12 kids under the age of 14 who are professionally acting and now getting paid for it.
Wow.
And so for me, that is the power. That's the future. Um, they come unboxed already. I don't have to unbox them when I'm directing. To
Yeah.
go back to the idea of the box, yeah.
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 You're basically just investing into the future of the arts, which is so important. Like you were saying, how you got your start in the arts at a young age. I got my start in the arts at a young age, and I think
Yeah.
that's such a great age to instill this seed of the arts.
Yeah. Very few theater companies do that. There will be
Mhm.
children's theater companies and only children will act, or there
Mhm.
will be adult theater companies. But we are creating a theater company where on stage we see life as it is. You see
Mhm.
a grandchild, a grandmother, a mother, you see a 20-year-old, an 87-year-old, and a 6-year-old acting in the same scene.
Right.
And we we are in collaboration with the Children's Theatre of Charlotte, which is one of the largest, oldest children's theatres. We are doing a partition play, which deals with the partition of India and Pakistan, and we have adult actors acting as kids
Mm.
because there is huge liability issues with with children.
Right.
But I take the bull by the horns and say, no, a child has to act the child role,
Right.
and I play the risk game, but
Mhm.
it's worthwhile because um, children who look like us don't necessarily get the lead in the school play,
Yeah.
and that is the harsh reality of today.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that the time it's taking to make that change is telescoping. 10 years ago, it was really hard. 3 years ago, I don't know, but post I want to say post Black Lives Matter, and this whole question of representation and um, the the social climate is acting in our favor now,
Yeah.
as of maybe 18 months ago.
Mhm.
And so this change is, the time that it's going to take for the acceptance and change is being telescoped thanks to all these DEI conversations, representation of BIPOC conversations, all of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what advice would you have for young South Asian artists or aspiring South Asian artists who are just entering into this field?
I would tell them, don't hesitate, don't overthink, of course, but find make your allies where you find them.
Mm.
And if your ally is a small Indian theater company in your local theater company, then make that your ally.
Mhm.
Uh, and don't prejudge, um, because very often this weird mindset that I was talking about, that mainstream theater is mainstream and immigrant theater is not, is it's not just among the mainstream.
Right.
It's us too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say to them, allies are important, and find the allies and the platforms that respect you and that you trust. You don't have to always try to follow a path that somebody else decided was
Mhm.
good for you.
Yeah. And if you could define what you wanted your legacy to be as yourself and as with Enact Arts, what would you want that to be?
Um, I mean, the legacy that I want to leave behind is kind of hardwired in our mission statement. Where I want South Asian stories to become a natural part of global storytelling
Mhm.
repertoire. But that's, of course, a very overarching thing. I am actually working to create a Center for South Asian Excellence in the Performing Arts,
Mm.
which would be the home, just like Peter Brook moved to Paris and created this, international theater, which had representation from every country in the world. And it became a safe, brave place for actors and directors and creators to not just act and direct and create, but to also reject stuff that they'd made
Mm.
if they
Yeah.
felt it wasn't good enough, without the pressure of time or performance, or
Mhm.
to create that space where people can really find the best of themselves as creative artists and create a home. I mean, in Silicon Valley, we have the Mexican Heritage Plaza, which does that for Mexican
Mhm.
culture. Um, and Yeah, I want that incubator to become a center of excellence and
Mhm.
to really produce confident, brave artists, not afraid of breaking boundaries and doing constantly innovative work.
Mhm. I love what you said about the safe, brave place where there's no constraint on time and the fear of rejection, because I feel like that's such a big thing that a lot of artists are going through, have gone through, and are especially going through right now, is just that pressure to create without giving yourself time to rest and to be inspired, and just allowing that space for people to be creative is so important.
Yeah, and to not have the pressure of time. I mean,
Mhm.
I I was almost 50 years old when I started Enact, so uh, there is no time like the time that feels right to you.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with age. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with where you live. I mean, Enact was born while I was in conversation with Jean-Claude in Paris, and then was incorporated in Houston, and now our head office is in California. But I am now doing collaborations with London and Bombay, and it's just, and I didn't plan any of this.
Right.
It's just you grab the opportunity and you embrace the moment, and you feel what's right in that moment for your community.
Yeah. And speaking of that, do you have any upcoming projects that you're currently working on that you can tell us about?
Oh, the best and the most ambitious project ever. So we are doing a play called The Jungle Book Rudyard Revised,
Okay.
which is it is 2.5 years in the making. We had 14 writers in our conservatory program uh, between the age of 7 and 60 something, who were given this task of answering the question if Rudyard Kipling, who, since he wrote the play, has been given a lot of bad press about, how he's a racist, colonialist, warmonger,
Mhm.
uh, whatever. Um, so the directive that was given to the writers' room in the conservatory program, and these are advanced uh, theater artists, even when they're young, was if Kipling were to be given the opportunity to write Jungle Book again,
Mm.
what would Jungle Book look like? And what we have today is a play that is deeply set back in its South Asian roots, in its Indian roots, right in the Seone Hills. All the artwork and the projection design and everything has been created by Madhubani artists who live and work in that area.
Wow.
The costume design is using fabric that is woven and traditional from all the different parts of India to represent all the different animals in the jungle. We use tribal jewelry and, all of that. The music is by George Brooks, who is this quintessential American jazz saxophonist, playing with people like Ella Fitzgerald, except he has this other side of him where he's a passionate Indian classical, you know, um, musician. He
Oh,
plays very
wow.
often with Zakir Hussain and Viku Vinayak Ram. And so he understands India and America through music very, very well. Um, and the play has all the essence of the Jungle Book story,
Mhm.
but the tiger is not the bad guy. He's
Mm.
just misunderstood, and he gets to say his piece about why he's misunderstood. We are partnering with the Tiger Conservation and Agency to talk about tiger conservation work in all the different cities that we are taking this play.
Mhm.
And the play, the writers were clever enough to make Rudyard a character in the play.
Ooh.
So he writes the story as he speaks to the audience
Mhm.
in conversation with this very snarky peacock. And he becomes the storyteller within the story of the storyteller. So it is beautifully layered, and Mowgli becomes the spokesperson for finding ways for jungle and village to cohabit in ways, in a symbiotic manner
Right.
rather than in a confrontational manner.
Mhm.
And so it's very much a play of our times.
Mhm.
And all the young people are played by young people. A lot of the animals are played by young people as well. Our youngest actor is 7. Our oldest is 87. We have a
Wow.
cast of 2. Uh, the choreography is based on Kalaripayattu, which is, this
Mhm.
ancient martial arts form, which then traveled with Buddhist monks to China, and then became the Shaolin martial arts movement. Um, and it's a martial arts form whose movement is based in animalistic behavior, and so
Right.
it lends itself very well to the Jungle Book. So
Mhm.
you are going to see a Jungle Book that is so deeply Indian, and yet it's a universal story, and yet it is a story. It is a very American story in terms of this um, conversation we are now having about DEI and BIPOC representation.
Mhm.
A very contemporary story in terms of everything we can do to understand and preserve tiger populations.
Yeah.
And so, yes.
I see your passion for the environmental stories coming in. Yeah, and when can we watch this, and where can we watch this?
So, Ishika, I'm hoping that you will work with me to bring the production to LA. We open in Palo Alto at the end of September. Then we play
Okay.
in Houston in October. Then we go back to San Francisco in December, in November. We go to San Jose in December. And then next year, we are planning a national tour that will go to Seattle, Chicago, Boston, Dallas. Uh, we're looking at Austin. It's all a question of how many partners, collaborators we can tie in, and how much money we can raise.
Right.
So if there's anybody, excuse me, listening to us right now that wants to write us a check.
Yeah, and where can we find your work and Enacte's work and potentially support, donate, or just buy tickets?
The very best place is our website. Everything we do and are is on our website, and it's enact.org, ENACTE.org. And the way to remember is the French phrase that I told you earlier, on act, which
Mhm.
then justifies the E at the end of enact.
Yes. And I just sent that into the YouTube chat as well. So
Great.
if anyone did not get that, it's enacte.org.
Yes. Anybody that wants to be part of Jungle Book or any other project that we're working on, or has a new play that they want us to read, that's the place to send it. info@enact.org.
Okay,
Any
perfect.
questions? info@enact.org. We monitor that email incessantly.
Amazing. I just want to thank you for sharing your journey, for taking that leap of faith, I guess you could call it, just really investing in Indian stories and South Asian stories, and for the precedent that you have set, and the voices that you have uplifted.
Thank you. Thank you, Ishika. And I want to wish you all the best for your journey as a
Thank you.
creative person, and for A QISSAA with Ishika. I hope many people sit in this chair that I'm sitting in and have a chance to talk with you, because what comes through really to me is your commitment to raising our voices. And that's beautiful to see. So thank you, Ishika.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who tuned into today's episode. This is the 17th episode. It feels crazy that we've already come this far. And stay tuned for the next episode sometime in August. And please remember to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube. And stay healthy, stay well, and I will see you all at the next episode. And thank you so much again, Vinita.
Thank you. And stay creative, y'all.
Yes.